Part 53. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji-Sheng Chang. Chapter 521. Lin Yu glanced at Suwan'er, and then said in a cold voice, "Take the boss lady away." After Suwan'er saw this scene, her eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, her eyebrows seemed to be twisted together, and then she shook her head. "No, this big guy is too strong. With your strength, you can't deal with this big guy at all. If I come to help you, the two of us will work together, maybe we can still fight." At this time, Lin Yu heard Suwan'er say this, and he just roared angrily, "I just said, take the boss lady away quickly, don't you understand what I said?" There is a taste of not being able to refuse in Lin Yu's words. At this time, Suwan'er opened her mouth, as if she wanted to say something. After Suwan'er heard what Lin Yu said, her face was slightly ugly. She stared at Lin Yu, and then said in a cold voice, "Anyway, I have just expressed my feelings to you. What do you want to do? It's up to you. You can't control me no matter what I want to do." Suwan'er's eyes were full of determination. After Lin Yu heard what Suwan'er said, 3 black lines appeared on his forehead, and he was speechless. His eyes were fixed on Suwan'er, and a bitter smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Alas, why are you doing this? You might lose your life if you don't do it well, you." At this time, Suwan'er, after hearing what Lin Yu said, she stared at Lin Yu with a smile on her face, and the smile at the corner of her mouth became more and more obvious. "What do you mean by me? I am willing to do this. Your choice is to fight, and my choice is to fight with you. Is there any problem with this?" Ares, who was far away, saw Suwan'er and Lin Yu talking and laughing. At this time, he was furious and roared, "Boy, you don't take me seriously. Since you want to die, it would be unreasonable if I don't help you today." Ares suddenly rushed towards the two of them again. At this time, Ares' speed was extremely fast. In just one breath, he had arrived in front of Lin Yu. At this time, Ares waved the Spear of Destiny and swung it towards where Lin Yu was standing. Lin Yu quickly got up and dodged. Where Ares had just stabbed, the space there collapsed completely, and a black hole was formed in an instant. Lin Yu couldn't understand why such a terrifying attack could be launched by just one person. At this time, Lin Yu was slightly stunned. After Ares saw this scene, the smile on his lips became more and more obvious, and his eyes were full of contempt. "Boy, are you ready to die now?" Lin Yu was naturally not a pushover. At this time, Lin Yu jumped up and dodged Ares's attack. After seeing this level of battle, Suwan'er's face turned pale instantly. Suwan'er's eyes were full of disbelief. Lin Yu rolled his eyes at Suwan'er in annoyance, and then said in a cold voice, "Now you should know the horror of this big guy, what else do you want to say now?" Lin Yu stared at Suwan'er with his eyes, and the smile on his lips became more and more obvious. At this time, Suwan'er subconsciously took a few steps back. She turned her head and stared at Lin Yu. "Why did you provoke this guy just now? Don't you know how scary this guy is?" Lin Yu just spread his hands and said, "Of course I know how scary this guy is, but I have many ways to deal with this scary big guy." Suwan'er certainly didn't believe what Lin Yu said. She just rolled her eyes at Lin Yu. "Stop bragging here. Let's think of a way to get out of here." The smile on Lin Yu's mouth began to become more and more obvious. He suddenly jumped to the side, and then came to Suwan'er's side. He gently embraced Suwan'er's slender waist, and then summoned the space-time beast directly. "Space-time beast, take her to a safe place." Lin Yu also carried the proprietress to the head of the space-time beast. The space-time beast heard Lin Yu, and after saying this, he just nodded his huge head, and then disappeared from the spot. After seeing this scene, Ares' sneer became more and more obvious, and his eyes were full of disdain. "I didn't expect you to be such a romantic. You are about to die, but you still have the mood to care about women. Lin Yu ignored Ares's ridicule. Ares obviously found the little guy in front of him a bit interesting, so he was not in a hurry to kill Lin Yu. It was like a cat that caught a mouse and would not directly kill him. It's like eating a mouse, but playing with it first. That's what Ares wanted. Lin Yu just shook his head. A stupid guy like you will never understand what I do. Really? But I know how to break your bones bit by bit. I believe that knowing these is enough. The rest is not important. The warlord spurted out a mouthful of flames, and the flames flew towards Lin Yu. At this moment, Lin Yu thought, and then the fire unicorn appeared in front of Lin Yu. The ball of flames was directly swallowed by Huo Kailan's mouth. At this time, not to mention Lin Yu, even Ares was stunned. Ares's eyes were directly fixed on Huo Kailan's body. There was quite a bit of surprise in his eyes. This little thing is really interesting. I didn't expect it to be able to swallow the fire of war. Huo Kailan just burped, his face full of enjoyment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 522. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on Huo Kailan. Indeed, in front of this huge warlord, this Huo Kailan was simply not worth mentioning. But for some reason, this Huo Kailan's body was, the kind of coercion it exuded made even the warlord feel a little frightened. The warlord roared in the direction of Fire Kailan, seeming to be fighting for his own majesty. Fire Kailan also screamed like this, but this scream was a bit interesting. Ares let out an angry roar, and then suddenly flew towards Lin Yu again. Boy, you better suffer death today. The warlord flapped his wings desperately, and the surrounding space was like a shattered mirror, which began to fall piece by piece. The entire town was instantly involved in the cracks in time and space by the endless turbulence of time and space. But fortunately, after experiencing the battle between Shenzingnan and Lin Yu, the residents of the small town did not dare to hesitate for a moment and evacuated the place in an instant. If not for this, I am afraid they would still do it this time. Cause more trouble. The warlord's wings were flapping desperately, giving people an extremely terrifying feeling, making people's hearts tremble suddenly. Lin Yu quietly took a step forward. The aura in his whole body was unparalleled and indestructible. At this moment, Lin Yu was so angry that he laughed, ha ha ha, okay, you're welcome. Today, I will show you how powerful I am. Lin Yu flew towards the warlord quietly. At this time, Fire Kailan stood on Lin Yu's shoulders. White Tiger appeared at Lin Yu's feet. Baihu blew out a breath of turbid air. Fire Kailan's mouth spewed out a mouthful of unicorn fire. Perhaps it was because the fire of war had just been swallowed up. The power of the Kailan fire at this moment made people see it, and their hearts could not help but tremble. The smile at the corner of Lin Yu's mouth began to become more and more obvious, and his eyes were full of mockery. The warlord flapped his wings, and then a whirlwind formed in front of the warlord. The whirlwind flew towards Lin Yu desperately. A breath of turbid air, the Kailan true fire, and the wargang wind collided together. The powerful impact directly knocked Lin Yu away. After Ares saw this scene, the smile on his lips became more and more obvious. The warlord didn't even take a few steps back, but just straightened up and stabilized his figure. Ha ha ha, little guy, you are no match for me, so you should give up. If you give up now, you can still have this glimmer of hope. Otherwise, you will definitely die. Lin Yu never expected that although the alien beast was only one level behind, it was such a huge difference. His face was slightly ugly, and his eyes were fixed on Ares. At this time, he just like that, I slowly climbed up. How is it possible? How can your strength be so terrifying? This is absolutely impossible, absolutely impossible. Lin Yu was even a little hysterical. Ares, the god of war, was holding the spear of destiny and looking down from a high position. He seemed to be the god who controlled all living beings. A bit of coldness flashed in his eyes, and then he said in a cold voice, "Nothing is impossible. Today, since you want to seek death, I will give you death." The spear of destiny was thrown out by Ares. The spear of destiny cut through the world. In just a moment, it had already arrived in front of Lin Yu. Lin Yu seemed to have already felt that, as sharp as the spear of destiny, he narrowed his eyes like this, as if waiting for his upcoming fate. After seeing this scene, Arya looked quite panicked. "Master, listen to me, you still have a chance now." Lin Yu also had a wry smile on his lips, and then turned his head and glanced at Arya. "What chance do I have now?" Arya shook her head, a flash of determination flashed in her eyes. "Listen to me, you do still have a chance now. As long as you listen to my instructions, I have a way to help you." Lin Yu, who had already fallen into despair, felt a little excited in his eyes after hearing what Arya said. "What chance do I have now? Tell me." After Arya pondered for a moment, she then said softly, "When you are facing a life-threatening situation, the system can give you a choice, which is an emergency task. As long as you can pass this emergency task, then there will be a chance for rotation." Opportunity to rotate? What is opportunity to rotate? Why can't I understand what you are saying? Actually, it's very simple. The chance of rotation means that you can forcibly designate an ancient beast for rotation. Of course, after the rotation, it is uncertain whether the beast will be upgraded or downgraded. Lin Yu's brows seemed to be knitted together. "I see, then come and tell me how I can take advantage of this rotation opportunity." As soon as Lin Yu finished speaking, he heard an elegant female voice, "Ding, please ask the host if you want to do a forced rotation." Lin Yu nodded. "Carry out forced rotation." Forced rotation, unyielding fighting spirit, and living towards death. When Lin Yu heard about the mission of the system, he was as confused as a 2-foot-tall monk. He had no idea what the system was trying to express. "Arya, what exactly does the mission of the system mean? What does it mean to live towards death and have an unyielding will to fight?" Arya also shook her head in the same way, with a wry smile on her lips. "You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment." Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 523. I'm not afraid of you. At this time, Lin Yu did not retreat but advanced, and actually flew straight towards the Spear of Destiny. Just a moment later, Lin Yu had already flown in front of the Spear of Destiny. His eyes widened with anger, and the awe-inspiring killing intent in his body was suddenly released. That violent murderous aura was raging so wantonly in Lin Yu's body at the moment. Although it was only for a moment, it gave people an extremely terrifying and terrible pressure last year. Even Ares was slightly shocked by Lin Yu's aura. Ares's eyes were fixed on Lin Yu, and his expression was slightly condensed. "I didn't expect that this ant-like guy actually dared to face my Spear of Destiny. I should have wondered if my Spear of Destiny had weakened a lot, so that's why this hateful guy had such an illusion." Ares let out a roar, and then his face turned gloomy instantly, and the violent killing intent was raging in his chest. The Spear of Destiny cut through the space, carrying Ares's will and countless dead souls in the ancient battlefield, and stabbed towards Lin Yu. Even in the face of death, Lin Yu's face still showed no trace of cowardice. And at this moment, when the Spear of Destiny was still 3 inches away from Lin Yu suddenly stretched out his hand, and then immediately grabbed the Spear of Destiny. The tip of the spear, Lin Yu's blood seeped into the Spear of Destiny. An elegant female voice suddenly appeared in Lin Yu's mind. "Congratulations to the host for completing the mission. Please select the alien beast for forced rotation." Lin Yu's lips curled into a smile. "I choose Fire Kylin." Selection completed, Fire Kylan is in the process of forced rotation. At this moment, the fire unicorn on Lin Yu's shoulder suddenly disappeared. The next second, a majestic fire unicorn appeared in front of Lin Yu. The aura of the fire unicorn was extremely terrifying, even though it was only for a moment. The situation, but the current Fire Kylan is completely different from before. After Ares, the god of war, saw this scene, his brows seemed to be knitted together, and there was a look of disbelief in the corners of his eyes and brows. How is it possible? How could this guy suddenly become so strong? This is absolutely impossible. The brows of Ares, the god of war, seemed to be knitted together. His eyes were fixed on Fire Kylan, and his expression suddenly turned cold. Huo Kylan let out an angry roar and spit out a mouthful of flames, and his whole body was also wrapped in a burst of fire. The Spear of Destiny was forcibly grasped by Lin Yu, and blood seeped into the Spear of Destiny. Lin Yu only felt a sense of desolation. Ares, the god of war, even noticed his connection with the Spear of Destiny started to get weaker and weaker. After seeing this scene, Ares, the god of war, suddenly had an ominous premonition in his heart. At this time, he wanted to take back the Spear of Destiny forcibly, but at this time Ares, unexpectedly found that he seemed to have no way to take back the Spear of Destiny. Ares's face began to become more and more ugly, his brows seemed to be knitted together, and then he shook his head crazily. Impossible, this is absolutely impossible, how could this Spear of Destiny lose contact with me? At this time, Lin Yu had an evil smile on his lips, and the smile on his face became more and more obvious. At this time, he just threw the Spear of Fate in his hand. Here, he glanced towards Ares. Thank you for the weapon. I will accept your weapon for you. Don't worry, I will definitely not let him be in the dust. Ares never expected that the ant in front of him could actually conquer his own Spear of Destiny. At this time, he was completely stunned. After being stunned for a moment, Ares let out an angry roar. At this time, Ares was like an angry leopard, with a gloomy look in his eyes. His eyes were fixed on Lin Yu's body. At this time, the cold look in the eyes of Ares, the god of war, began to become more and more obvious. He let out an angry roar in his mouth, and then spoke with gritted teeth. Today, I want you to die. It can be seen that Ares, the current god of war, is really angry. At this time, Ares flew towards Lin Yu. His speed was extremely fast. He just shouted and shouted. The scene of sucking had already arrived in front of Lin Yu. At this time, Ares, the god of war, was so powerful that his eyes were completely cold. That mysterious aura began to spread gradually, and then the face of Ares, the god of war, became slightly ugly. At this time, Ares, the god of war, stared at the forest with his eyes. The terrifying aura began to spread quietly around Yu's body. At this time, Lin Yu felt only endless killing intent and endless desolation. Lin Yu subconsciously wanted to dodge. At this time, Lin Yu's face began to gradually turn pale. He knew that the power of the god of war Ares might be very strong, or very terrifying, but he never thought that Ares' strength was so terrifying. Lin Yu's eyes stared at Ares, and his brows seemed to be twisted together. His eyes were full of disbelief. At this time, he began to struggle desperately, and then he roared. Asshole, damn it, I will kill you, I will kill you. At this time, Lin Yu fell into despair for a while. Although the fire Kirin could barely make the space around him not so oppressive, there was no better way to help him really push away the squeezed space. For a moment, Lin Yu's face was plunged into despair. At this moment, his face looked quite desolate, and the corners of his mouth even raised a bitter smile. There was a sense of helplessness in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 524. But at this time, Lin Yu seemed to have suddenly remembered something. He just glanced coldly at Ares, the god of war, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth changed even more. It became more and more obvious. You want to kill me, but you can't kill me. As I said, you can't do anything to me. It's my fault today. If nothing else, I'll retreat first. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he disappeared directly in front of Ares, the god of war. At this time, Lin Yu disappeared without a trace. Even Ares, the god of war, could not catch half of Lin Yu's aura. At this time, Ares, the god of war, turned pale in an instant. He moved toward after looking around for a long time, there was still no trace of Lin Yu. At this time, Ares, the god of war, glanced around and let out an angry roar. At this time, he was like an angry leopard. Asshole, don't be caught by me. If you are caught by me, I will definitely bite every inch of your bones with my own mouth. And at this moment, a woman suddenly appeared next to Ares, the god of war. The woman turned her head and glanced at Ares, the god of war, and raised a few meaningful words at the corners of her mouth. There was a hint of mockery in his smile and eyes. At this time, Ares, the god of war, was furious after seeing the woman's smile. He turned his head, his eyes fixed on the woman's body, and a cold aura began to gradually spread. Asshole, what are you laughing at? At this time, after the woman heard what Ares, the god of war, said, there was quite a bit of contempt in her eyes. Her eyes were fixed on Ares, the god of war, and those words at the corners of her mouth were like this. His sneer was even more obvious. Don't you know what I'm laughing at? Of course I'm laughing at your stupidity. I'm afraid there's no one stupider than you in the world. The woman stared at Ares, the god of war, with a smile on her face, and her eyes were full of ridicule. At this time, after hearing what Aphrodite said, Ares, the god of war, suddenly turned around and grabbed the woman's neck. At this time, Aphrodite just dodged sideways slightly, and then directly avoided the claw of Ares, the god of war. Aphrodite stared at Ares, the god of war, with a smile on her face, her eyes full of ridicule, and the sneer at the corner of her mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, Ares, the god of war, was furious, and his eyes seemed to be about to spit out flames. Enough! A light voice suddenly sounded in their ears. There was something undeniable in that voice, and there was a bit of coldness between the brows. When the two of them heard that voice, they really stopped fighting like this. A woman in a light blue dress came over from a distance. The woman turned her head and glanced at Ares, the god of war, with a strange color flashing in her eyes. How is it? How is that boy? Ares, the god of war, just pondered for a moment, and then shook his head. It's a bit difficult to deal with, that little guy seems a little troublesome. Moreover, he just took away my spear of destiny. The woman heard the god of war Ares, and after saying this, a flash of emotion flashed on her face. It was unbelievable that her eyes were fixed on Ares, the god of war. What did you say? I am not a fool today. Festival, you'd better not joke with me. At this time, the face of Ares, the god of war, suddenly turned cold, and then he spoke with gritted teeth. Do you think I'm kidding you? After hearing what Ares, the god of war, said, Oceanus' eyes were full of disbelief. At this time, the ocean goddess seemed to be stunned. A majestic god was actually played by this kid. In the midst of this applause, damn it, damn it! Oceanus's eyes were full of anger. At this time, Aphrodite, who was aside, remained silent. Aphrodite just turned her head and glanced at the two of them. Don't forget what we are here for this time. We can't stay here for too long before we have to return to the temple. Otherwise, if we are discovered by Zeus, we will be in trouble. At this time, Oceanus heard it. After Aphrodite said this, she nodded slightly. You are right. Now we need to get to that place quickly and resurrect Gaia, the mother of the earth. This is the top priority. You damn guy just delayed us for too long. Ares, the god of war, was already very unhappy, so after hearing what Oceanus said, his eyes were about to burst into flames. Asshole, I think you are just looking for death. Oceanus, don't think that just because you woke me up, you can treat me like this. I tell you, this is absolutely impossible. Ares said this with gnashing teeth, his eyes and eyebrows were full of gloom, and the murderous aura on his body was so stern. A cold aura spread from Ares. Oceanus just took a step forward, and then a giant dragon with 2 wings suddenly appeared at Oceanus' feet. The ice and snow blue dragon flickered its wings and stared at Ares. The warlord also roared at the ice and snow blue dragon. At this time, Oceanus just moved his mind, and a cold air of ice and snow directly wrapped around the god of war Ares. After the god of war Ares was wrapped by the ice and snow, his face instantly turned pale and ugly, and then he fell to the ground instantly. Finally, it hit the ground hard, and a crack appeared on the ice. Then the ice broke into pieces, and ice chips flew everywhere. A bone-chilling chill enveloped the god of war, Ares. The corners of Oceanus' mouth curled up into a sneer, and a cold light flashed in his eyes. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chang. Chapter 525. At this time, Aphrodite looked at the two of them, her face turned slightly cold, and then a bit of gloom flashed in her eyes. I say, are you done? Do you want one of you to die or fall into reincarnation forever? Don't forget the purpose of our visit this time. Save some strength and go to hell to hunt the 3-headed devil dog. Aphrodite said this in a cold voice. When Oceanus and Ares, the god of war, heard what Aphrodite said, their faces barely calmed down. The ice and snow blue dragon took Oceanus and flew away. At this time, the ice and snow blue dragon blew up a series of war winds, and even this space was crackling. Exotic beast, ice and snow blue dragon god level 8, level 49. Qualification, alien, intermediate. Life, 999999999779997. Speed, 999999999779997. Defense, 999999999999977. Attack, 99999999997999977. Skills, unknown. Introduction, living in the eternal sea, with the endless ocean as its body, possessing endless sources of ice and frost, the heart of war is indestructible, and the body of ice and snow is immortal. After seeing this scene, the god of war Ares did not say any more nonsense, and just flew forward in a still manner. Almost in the blink of an eye, he had disappeared in front of Aphrodite. At this time, Lin Yu felt as if he had fallen into endless darkness. In this trance, Lin Yu suddenly heard a voice. Little guy, do you want to have endless divine power? Do you want to inherit the will of the western heaven and earth? After hearing that voice, Lin Yu was confused. At this time, his eyebrows seemed to be twisted together. Who are you? Where am I now? The voice kept repeating the previous words, as if it was trapped in some kind of obsession. At this time, Lin Yu just sneered, and then waved his hand casually. Inherit the will of the western heaven and earth, and have endless divine power. Who doesn't want it? But you still have to pay the corresponding price. If it is that kind of price, I can't afford it. Why should I think about it? Lin Yu said in a cold voice. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the voice just smiled. Okay, since you want to inherit, then choose a door in front of you. Push open that door and you can get everything you want. At this time, 2 doors suddenly appeared in front of Lin Yu. There was a symbol of Zeus on both doors. When Lin Yu saw this scene, his face was slightly condensed, and a bit of solemnity flashed in his eyes and eyebrows. At this time, he was suddenly happy in his heart. At this time, he thought in his heart. Could it be that everything that the voice said was true? If everything that the voice said was true, then if I pushed open this door, wouldn't it be? When Lin Yu thought of this, he couldn't help laughing at the time. At this time, the smile on the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. After a while, Lin Yu calmed down. From childhood to adulthood, Lin Yu understood a truth very well, that is, there is no free lunch in the world. So when Lin Yu thought of this, his face was slightly ugly. He half closed his eyes, and a bit of complexity flashed in his eyes. Don't tell me that these things are free. There is no free lunch in the world. What conditions do you have? Tell me. Lin Yu said in a cold voice, and when he said this, no one answered him. Lin Yu's eyes flashed with a few strange colors, and then he frowned slightly. At this moment, Lin Yu half closed his eyes. Interesting, it's really interesting. Since you want to be mysterious, then I will play with you. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he walked towards the stone door on his left. At this time, Lin Yu gently pushed open the stone door, and then he felt a kind of endless anger of thunder points. At this time, Lin Yu felt like a lone boat in the sea, drifting unsteadily. If he was in front of Ares, the god of war, he still had the ability to resist, but he was sure that no matter who possessed such a terrifying power of heaven and earth, he would not even have the thought of resisting. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the endless sea of thunder and lightning in front of him. In this sea of thunder and lightning, there was a giant dragon with wings covered with silver arcs. In the endless sea of thunder and lightning, the thunder dragon was dying, but the endless power of thunder and lightning here seemed to be non-existent to the thunder dragon. And above the head of the thunder dragon, a ball of lightning actually wrapped around a hammer. The hammer of lightning was wrapped by these arcs, giving people an extremely powerful and terrifying feeling. At this time, after seeing this scene, Lin Yu seemed to be stunned. At this time, his eyes and eyebrows were full of disbelief. His eyes stared straight in front of him, and a bit of disbelief flashed in his eyes. At this time, Lin Yu heard that in the vast ocean of thunder and lightning, a distant and mighty voice sounded quietly. Little guy, if you let me go today, I will definitely follow you in the future. If you have my following, I dare not say anything else, but I will definitely be able to keep your life safe. The voice suddenly sounded in Lin Yu's ears. At this time, after hearing the voice of the thunder dragon, Lin Yu's eyes and eyebrows flashed with a bit of surprise. His eyes were fixed on the thunder dragon, and his expression suddenly froze. Protect my life? My life is safe now, I'm afraid I don't need you to protect me. Lin Yu said slowly. You are listening to novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 526. At this time, after the Eternal Thunder Dragon heard what Lin Yu said, a bit of solemnity flashed across the corner of his eyes and brows. At this time, he was a little panicked, and then he said to him in such a cold voice. Lin Yu said. Don't be like this. If you have any conditions, just put them forward. If I can agree to you, I will definitely agree to you. The voice of the Eternal Thunder Dragon rang in Lin Yu's ears. After hearing what the Eternal Thunder Dragon said, Lin Yu only had a few meaningful smiles at the corners of his mouth, and there was also a hint of laughter in the corners of his eyes and eyebrows. The look of mockery. But I don't seem to have any other conditions now, but I think if you are willing to be my beast, then it won't be a loss if I save you. Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly like this, the smile at the corner of his mouth becoming more and more obvious, and the corners of his eyes and brows were filled with excitement. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the Eternal Thunder Dragon's expression suddenly froze, and then he let out an angry roar. At this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon seemed to be angry. Do you know my true identity? As a mere human being, you are not even a god. Even if I recognize you as my lord, your soul will not be able to bear it. I am afraid that you will be nothing more than a god by then. You're just asking for trouble. At this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon was just trying to scare Lin Yu. Those timid people might have been frightened after hearing what the Eternal Thunder Dragon said. At this time, after Lin Yu heard the words of Eternal Thunder Dragon, a mocking smile appeared on the corner of his mouth, and a look of contempt flashed in his eyes, and then he shook his head. Shake his head. TCH, who are you trying to scare? You don't think I'm afraid of you, do you? It's ridiculous and stupid. I've never seen anyone stupider than you. At this time, after hearing what Lin Yu said, the Eternal Thunder Dragon's face became gloomy for a while. At this time, he let out an angry roar, and the monstrous aura in his body suddenly began to flow like this. Condensed out. The sea of electricity around him instantly became like boiling water. At this moment, Lin Yu certainly knew that if he came into contact with it, he would be seriously injured, and he might even die. At this time, Lin Yu's eyes flashed with a bit of solemnity. He half squinted his eyes, and then looked forward like this, and then rubbed his chin. It's interesting, it's really interesting. I really didn't expect that you can actually show such a strong sense of oppression. This is really something I didn't expect. Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly, and the sneer at the corner of his mouth became more and more obvious. Although the environment here is extremely scary, the more dangerous the place, the more challenging it is for Lin Yu. The more challenging the place, the more Lin Yu likes it. The Eternal Thunder Dragon let out an angry roar after hearing what Lin Yu said, and the murderous aura in his body became more and more obvious. Boy, if you can save me now, you may be able to escape from here. If you can't save me, then you have to stay here with me forever. But with your kid's skills, I'm afraid you can't escape from here. He will die here in a few decades. The eyes of the Eternal Thunder Dragon were fixed on Lin Yu. This clay bodhisattva still had a third degree of anger, not to mention that Lin Yu was not a weak person in the first place. So at this time, Lin Yu was a little angry. A cold light flashed in his eyes, and then he turned his head and glared coldly at Eternal Thunder Dragon. Stop talking nonsense. Today, I won't talk so much nonsense to you. If you want to die, I can make it happen for you. Lin Yu said in a cold voice, the corners of his eyes and brows filled with a gloomy meaning, and the murderous aura in his body became more and more obvious. At this time, the fire unicorn appeared on Lin Yu's shoulder, although the fire unicorn was still small. But at this time, the fire unicorn was exuding an extremely terrifying spark, and this fire unicorn had even reached the god level. Even though the level was still a few points behind the Eternal Thunder Dragon, it was still pretty good. Exotic Beast, Eternal Thunder Dragon God Level 9, Level 49. Qualification, Alien, Top. Life, 99999999999999777. Speed, 99999999997999977. Defense, 99999999999999777. Attack, 99999999999999777. Skill, unknown. Introduction, living in the Chaos Thunder Sea, with the Chaos Deole as the body, with the power of heaven and earth as the human being, the Deole exists forever, is eternal, unbreakable, undefeated, and will never fall into reincarnation. Before the battle of the gods, he signed an agreement with Zeus, to help Zeus deal with the war between the gods. At this time, Lin Yu stared at the Eternal Thunder Dragon with a smile on his face, a meaningful smile on the corner of his mouth, and a hint of teasing in his eyes. How about it? Have you thought about it clearly? If you haven't thought about it clearly, then I can wait for you here for a while, but I will only give you 1 hour. If you don't think about it clearly within this hour, then I will leave. Here it is. At this time, the eyes of the Eternal Thunder Dragon were staring directly at Lin Yu. Of course, he didn't believe that Lin Yu could actually leave, so he didn't care too much at first, as time passed by like this. Passage. An hour later, the corners of Eternal Thunder Dragon's lips also evoked a somewhat mocking smile. Little guy, didn't you say you wanted to leave? Now I want to see how you can leave here. The eyes of the Eternal Thunder Dragon were staring straight at Lin Yu, and the mocking smile at the corner of its mouth became more and more obvious. At this time, after Lin Yu heard what Eternal Thunder Dragon said, a look of contempt flashed in his eyes, and then he shook his head. Well, since you want to ask me to leave here, well, I'll make it happen for you. Goodbye, no, never see you again. After Lin Yu finished speaking, the space-time beast suddenly appeared in front of Lin Yu with a thought. In fact, Lin Yu at this time was just playing a psychological game with the Eternal Thunder Dragon. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 527. You must know that just now, Lin Yu had tried to feel the space tearing apart time and space, and used the space-time beast to teleport away from here, but the space-time beast had no way of interfering with this space. At this time, after seeing the time and space beast, the Eternal Thunder Dragon looked shocked, and there was a look of disbelief in the corners of his eyes and brows. You must know that there may not be many strange beasts that can control time and space in the entire universe. And even after Zeus spent all his time on the journey of the gods and turned the entire Western world upside down, he did not find any alien beasts at the time and space level. And now the ordinary-looking little guy in front of him carries a space-time beast and a young fire unicorn. The main reason is that the fire unicorn has already reached the level of God when he was young. Level, I'm afraid he should be an invincible existence when he reaches adulthood. By that time, I am afraid that in the entire Western Holy See, we may not be able to find a few strange beasts that can compete with it. After seeing this scene, the Eternal Thunder Dragon was stunned. Lin Yu said to the space-time beast with a smile on his face, "Leave, the big guy is not cooperating anyway." When Lin Yu finished speaking, the Eternal Thunder Dragon's face instantly turned ugly. At this moment, he could be heard saying in a deep voice, I promise you, I promise you." There was quite a bit of excitement in the words of Eternal Thunder Dragon. When Lin Yu heard that Eternal Thunder Dragon agreed to him, he almost jumped with excitement. However, at this time, Lin Yu also knew that he had not yet signed any master-servant contract with this Eternal Thunder Dragon, so I can't show too much excitement yet. Otherwise, if the Eternal Thunder Dragon goes back on his word later, I will probably lose more than the gain. When Lin Yu thought of this, he just coughed lightly, then turned his head, glanced coldly at Eternal Thunder Dragon, and then said in a cold voice with, "What? Have you figured it out? Let me tell you, except for the master-servant contract and I will promise to rescue you, don't think about buying me with any conditions, because that kind of thing is absolutely impossible." Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the Eternal Thunder Dragon. A cold aura emanated from Lin Yu's body. His eyes were fixed on the Eternal Thunder Dragon. There was a hint of a meaningful smile at the corner of his mouth. "I have figured it out. I have indeed figured it out. It is nothing more than signing a master-servant contract with you. But let me tell you, the power of my soul is extremely powerful. Your soul is extremely weak now. You will sign a master-servant contract soon. At some point, I'm afraid you'll suffer backlash." What Eternal Thunder Dragon said is right. Lin Yu's spirit at the moment is indeed too weak, so it is not surprising that Eternal Thunder Dragon said this. However, at this time, Lin Yu didn't care about all this. He was just so casual. He waved his hand. It doesn't matter, don't worry, my soul is powerful enough. Although your soul is a bit powerful, it's not to the point where I can't conquer it. Confidence, extremely powerful self-confidence. Lin Yu was indeed very confident in himself, so he stared at the Eternal Thunder Dragon with a smile on his face. At this time, after Eternal Thunder Dragon heard what Lin Yu said, the corners of his eyes and brows were filled with a sense of helplessness. He just shook his head helplessly without saying anything more. A moment later, a ball of light blue blood floated out from the top of the Eternal Thunder Dragon's head. The ball of light blue blood slowly floated towards Lin Yu. Lin Yu he also bit the tip of his tongue and spit out a mouthful of blood. After the blood of the Eternal Thunder Dragon and Lin Yu's blood essence came together, Lin Yu felt his soul being impacted by an extremely powerful force. At this time, Lin Yu's face suddenly became ugly. His eyes were fixed on the Eternal Thunder Dragon, and his brows seemed to be knitted together. How is it possible? How could it be like this? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the Eternal Thunder Dragon. At this moment, he felt as if his soul was about to be torn apart. A force of thunder and lightning hit his soul directly. It must be understood that the power of thunder and lightning is not trivial, not to mention that the human soul is extremely fragile. If a person's soul is hit by the power of thunder and lightning, even if he does not die, he will end up with a disability. At this time, Lin Yu's face turned pale, and a mouthful of blood spurted out from his mouth. But at this moment, when Lin Yu thought that his soul was about to suffer a heavy blow this time, suddenly, a ball of fiery red soft soul power quietly approached Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu's soul power was so wrapped by the soft ball of soul power. Lin Yu's eyes flashed with excitement. At this moment, the smile on the corner of his mouth began to become more and more obvious. His originally weak soul suddenly became so, it solidified. At this moment, the Eternal Thunder Dragon in the Sea of Thunder saw this scene, and there was an unbelievable look in the corners of his eyes. He seemed to be stunned, and his eyes were fixed on Lin Yu. The whole dragon was stunned when he saw this scene. After waiting for a moment, the Eternal Thunder Dragon roared, and then Lin Yu's mind moved, and suddenly a path appeared in the Sea of Thunder. The Eternal Thunder Dragon looked at Lin Yu with a lot of respect in his eyes. Lin Yu walked slowly towards the Eternal Thunder Dragon along the path. When he came to the side of the Eternal Thunder Dragon, he turned his head and looked at the Eternal Thunder Dragon. Why did Zeus use his Thor's hammer to suppress you here by force? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the Eternal Thunder Dragon, and there was a bit of confusion in his eyes, and his face was slightly condensed. At this moment, the Eternal Thunder Dragon's eyes flashed with helplessness, and finally he sighed leisurely. Alas, you can't know a person's heart by looking at his face. When I did something for Zeus, he asked me to submit to him, but I refused, so. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 528. The Eternal Thunder Dragon paused immediately after saying this. His eyes were filled with a desolate look, and the corners of his mouth evoked a bit of a wry smile. Zeus is really trying to kill the donkey. What he did is indeed a bit too much, but don't worry, I can't do such a thing. At this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon heard Lin Yu. After saying this, he felt like crying for a while. There was a bit of a bitter smile on the corners of his mouth, and there was a complete helplessness in the corners of his eyes and brows. Meaning. At this time, Eternal Thunder Dragon was thinking, you can't do such a thing? Ha ha ha, it's really funny. I'm afraid you are even worse than that guy. At least they didn't force me, I was subdued, but now you have directly turned me into your slave. However, at this time, the Eternal Thunder Dragon probably only dared to think this way in his heart, and he would never dare to tell this matter. The eyes of the Eternal Thunder Dragon were fixed on Lin Yu, and a wry smile appeared on the corner of its mouth, and then it nodded its huge dragon head. That's right, what you said is half true. I believe that master you will not do such a despicable thing. At this time, Lin Yu was also satisfied and nodded. He raised his head and glanced at the Thor's hammer on the head of the eternal thunder dragon. The Thor's hammer contained an extremely powerful mystical power. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's face became slightly ugly. He had a solemn look on his face, and then he just shaked his head. I'm afraid it's hard to get this Thor's hammer down. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed directly on the eternal thunder dragon. At this time, after hearing Lin Yu's words, the eternal thunder dragon's face was suddenly startled, and then his eyes were so straight. He stared intently at Lin Yu, his brows seeming to be knitted together. Then tell me, what should we do now? The eyes of the eternal thunder dragon were staring straight at Lin Yu. His expression was also slightly startled, and a strange color flashed across the corners of his eyes and brows. At this time, Lin Yu coughed lightly, and then glanced towards the eternal thunder dragon. What should I do? First lend me your power of thunder and lightning and wrap it around my body. I will take it by force and see if it works. Now I am afraid that this is the only way. There are other ways. A little difficult to do. Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the eternal thunder dragon. When the eternal thunder dragon heard what Lin Yu said, it just pondered for a moment and then gritted its teeth. At this time, the eternal thunder dragon seemed to have made up this great determination, and then spoke directly and categorically. Okay, since you have said so, let's do what you said. I will lend you my thunder and lightning power now. You step on my head first. After the eternal thunder dragon finished speaking, Lin Yu jumped up directly. He was above the head of the eternal thunder dragon. At this time, the Thor's hammer was probably only a short distance away from Lin Yu. At this time, Lin Yu could feel the terrifying power emanating from the Thor's hammer from a distance, and his expression also darkened slightly. At this moment, he also took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. Okay, now you can pass on your power to me. Hurry up and be direct. Otherwise, I'm afraid we will both be in trouble. The eternal thunder dragon slowly poured its thunder and lightning power into Lin Yu's body. Lin Yu controlled this thunder and lightning power to form a protective shield in front of him. The power of thunder and lightning was surging through Lin Yu's body like this. At this time, even Lin Yu had to admit that he was indeed enjoying the feeling of the power of thunder and lightning all over his body. Lin Yu took a deep breath, and then calmed down his mood slightly. He slowly stretched out his hand towards the Thor's hammer and grabbed it directly. When Lin Yu's fingers just came into contact with the Thor's hammer, his face was suddenly startled, and then the surging power surged up and down from his body. At this time, Lin Yu could clearly feel the terror and horror of that force. At this time, his face gradually turned pale, and his eyes and brows were completely short-sighted, with an unbelievable look. How is it possible? How could this power be so terrifying? This is absolutely impossible. The power of thunder and lightning was flying up and down on Lin Yu's body, and all the meridians on Lin Yu's body were completely destroyed by the external power of thunder and lightning. Lin Yu's face turned pale for a while. It was pale, and then a mouthful of blood spurted out. At this time, the eternal thunder dragon seemed to be able to feel the pain on Lin Yu's body at this moment. A bit of emotion flashed in the eyes of the eternal thunder dragon. At this time, his eyes were staring straight at him. On Lin Yu's body. At this moment, the eternal thunder dragon was thinking, although the way he just subdued me was a bit despicable, he is a person who is truly trustworthy and worthy of trust. This person is much better than those hypocrites. When the eternal thunder dragon thought of this, he made up his mind to follow Lin Yu in the future. After all, the eternal thunder dragon also believed that if Zeus encountered such a situation, Zeus would definitely give up taking the Thor's hammer. This is character. Blood flowed out of Lin Yu's eye sockets, and Lin Yu's nostrils were also full of blood. At this time, Lin Yu's whole body was bleeding, which made people look quite creepy. After a while, Lin Yu let out an angry roar, "It's just a broken hammer, I really don't believe I can't pick it up." When Lin Yu said this, the Thor's hammer was actually pulled out by Lin Yu so forcefully, and a violent thunder and lightning force directly penetrated this space. Even the eternal Thunder Dragon had to admit that the lightning power carried by Thor's hammer was even stronger than the lightning power carried by him. No wonder Zeus was known as the king of gods with Thor's hammer. You are listening to Novels at Bless Up channel. Wish you happiness and luck. Please subscribe to receive new novels. How do you feel about this novel? Please like and leave a comment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Ji Sheng Chong. Chapter 529. At this time, Lin Yu could only feel a few tiny arcs of electricity stretching out from the Thor's hammer. They began to follow Lin Yu's meridians, repairing the damaged parts of Lin Yu's body bit by bit. Meridians. When Lin Yu felt this power, there was quite a bit of excitement in the corners of his eyes and brows. At this time, the dilapidated meridians on his body were struck by the Thor's hammer almost at the same time. Completely repaired. Lin Yu's face also suddenly became happy. Finally, after the Thor's hammer repaired Lin Yu's meridians, the Thor's hammer actually penetrated directly into Lin Yu's body. Lin Yu looked at his dantian, where a Thor's hammer was hanging like this. His face suddenly became overjoyed, and the smile at the corner of his mouth suddenly became more and more obvious. But at this time, the endless sea of thunder around him actually surged towards Lin Yu's mind in an instant. For a moment, Lin Yu seemed to be stunned, completely distraught. Understand what this is all about. At this time, Lin Yu only felt that his whole body was filled with a kind of thunder and lightning power. The electric arc was tumbling up and down in his mind, moving repeatedly. The suspended power even made him I felt the overwhelming and irresistible pressure in this world. Lin Yu's face was also slightly startled, and there was a sense of solemnity in the corners of his eyes and brows. At this time, he half closed his eyes, and then glanced ahead. Then Lin Yu suddenly laughed, "Ha ha ha, power, this is the feeling of power. I didn't expect this power to be so powerful. It's perfect like this. It's perfect like this." At this time, what Lin Yu was saying was already a little incoherent. The corners of his eyes and brows were filled with excitement, and the smile at the corners of his mouth became more and more obvious. But at this moment, Lin Yu suddenly moved forward, soaring straight up. His speed was even faster. In just one breath, he was already in front of someone. A bit of excitement flashed in the corners of Lin Yu's eyes, and at this time, there was also a slight smile on the corners of his mouth. After waiting for this moment, Lin Yu seemed to suddenly remember something as if he had a flash of inspiration. He rushed straight up, and in just a moment, he was already in front of the world. Lin Yu stood in the sky. At this moment, he was standing in the void, and a vast aura between heaven and earth began to spread crazily towards Lin Yu's body. The smile at the corner of Lin Yu's mouth suddenly became more and more obvious, and he flew forward like this. At this time, Lin Yu's speed was extremely fast. In just one breath, he had reached the most central position in this space. Electric arcs flashed all over Lin Yu's body. These arcs spread and twisted like this, and even these arcs had a vague appearance of tearing this world apart completely. Lin Yu's eyes were full of excitement. At this time, he was laughing to the sky, and the smile at the corner of his mouth suddenly became more and more obvious. Ha ha ha, it turns out that this is the feeling of power. It turns out that this is the feeling of power. This feeling is really wonderful. This feeling is really wonderful. Lin Yu's eyes were full of excitement. At this time, he waved his hand heavily in front of him, and then endless thunder and lightning power gathered in his palm. Lin Yu's thoughts moved, and the eternal Thunder Dragon appeared at his feet. At this time, Lin Yu said loudly, "The eternal Thunder Dragon rises." After Lin Yu finished saying this, the eternal thunder dragon spat out a huge magic ball from his mouth. The huge magic ball continued to fly towards the sky, and slowly flew away. In the end, the entire magic ball suddenly exploded in the sky. At this time, Lin Yu just looked around, and then nodded with satisfaction. The smile at the corner of his mouth suddenly became more and more obvious. A mysterious aura rose from Lin Yu's body. At this time, Lin Yu opened his eyes slightly, with a complete sense of indifference in his eyes. Go back, come here, there is nothing you want, but it is better to go back. After Lin Yu finished speaking, he disappeared directly from the spot. At this time, his eyes also evoked some complex colors. In an instant, it was as if he had understood something, and a ball burst out from the sky. Under the firelight, Lin Yu's eyes were somewhat indifferent. Immediately afterwards, the space here collapsed little by little, and the fire unicorn seemed to be joining in the fun, appearing in the air like this, tumbling up and down, flying left and right, and it looked so lively. At this moment, Lin Yu suddenly flew out, and then broke away from the space and rushed outside. At this time, Lin Yu's speed was even faster. Even in a blink of an eye, he has already arrived outside this space. Lin Yu's mouth curled up a little bit of smile, and there was a bit of teasing in his eyes. After a while, Lin Yu suddenly remembered something as if a flash of inspiration, and looked in the previous direction, but the next second he felt that the environment in front of him changed instantly. At this time, the earth turned and the stars moved, and Lin Yu's head suddenly hurt, and then the whole person fainted. I don't know how long it took. Lin Yu woke up slowly at this time. He looked around, and then he clenched his fists slightly, but everything around him was gone. Lin Yu's face was slightly startled, and at this time he moved his mind, and then the eternal thunder dragon suddenly appeared in front of Lin Yu. Fortunately, it was in this endless desert of light. If it was in this downtown, I'm afraid that half of the city would be razed to the ground in an instant. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he was stunned for a moment. Survival of the Beasts, Awakening the Beast Taming System at the Beginning. Author, Sheng Chong. Chapter 530. The Eternal Thunder Dragon let out an angry roar, and the roar resounded throughout the world. The sounds made everyone nearby feel an extremely terrifying sense of oppression. After waiting for a while, Lin Yu's face darkened slightly, and then he coughed lightly. You look too big like this. If you go out on weekdays, you will definitely scare others. Can you make yourself smaller? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the Eternal Thunder Dragon, with a bit of confusion flashing through his eyes. At this time, when the Eternal Thunder Dragon heard what Lin Yu said, he was slightly stunned at first, and then let out a roar, seeming to express his dissatisfaction to Lin Yu. Lin Yu turned his head and rolled his eyes at the Eternal Thunder Dragon. Hey, you big guy, don't forget that the contract we signed is a master-servant contract. If you really dissatisfy me, then what will happen to you? Lin Yu just spoke unhurriedly, and the smile at the corner of his mouth suddenly became more and more obvious, and there was quite a bit of teasing in his eyes. After hearing Lin Yu's threat, the Eternal Thunder Dragon's face instantly turned ugly. At this time, he quickly recovered to the same size as Lin Yu. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he was so satisfied at the time. He nodded, and a few meaningful smiles appeared at the corners of his mouth. Wouldn't it be better to be like this? You also know that I like those big guys who are obedient, and I don't like those who are not. Do you understand? Lin Yu's eyes were fixed on the Eternal Thunder Dragon. The smile at the corner of his mouth suddenly became more and more obvious. Of course, the Eternal Thunder Dragon understood what was in front of him. This man couldn't afford to offend, so he could only tap the faucet lightly. At this time, Lin Yu was also satisfied. He nodded and smiled. The smile at the corner of his mouth suddenly became more and more obvious. Okay, you can go back now. I didn't expect that summoning you would require such a huge amount of spiritual power. It seems that if there is nothing important in the future, I won't be able to summon you. After Lin Yu thought of this, he slowly walked outside. At this moment, Lin Yu saw Su Weiner lying in the distance. At this time, Su Weiner was writhing desperately in the desert, looking as if she was suffering from great pain. After seeing this scene, Lin Yu's expression condensed slightly, a strange light flashed in his eyes, and his brows seemed to be knitted together. What's going on? Why does Amelia Su look so painful? Lin Yu was also filled with confusion. At this time, Arya's voice sounded in Lin Yu's mind. According to the information, the woman in front of me must have been poisoned by the sky-red fire scorpion. Lin Yu half squinted his eyes, a bit of complicated meaning flashed in his eyes, he frowned slightly, and a bit of strange color flashed in his eyes. The poison of the sky-red fire scorpion? What on earth is going on with this thing? Lin Yu spoke unhurriedly, with a hint of confusion in the corners of his eyes and brows, and his face turned slightly cold. At this moment, Arya stared at Lin Yu with a smile on her face, which made Lin Yu feel numb. At this time, Lin Yu just coughed lightly, and then said in a cold voice, "What happened? Don't just laugh there, tell me quickly." Actually, the poison of the celestial red fire scorpion, in layman's terms, is. At this time, Arya was also a little embarrassed. After explaining this clearly, Arya suddenly paused. After Lin Yu saw this scene, he was as confused as the monk who was fighting for the second time. At this time, his face also darkened slightly. What's going on? Stop trying to talk to me here and talk about it quickly. In this way, Arya played a movie about the island country in Lin Yu's mind. Lin Yu was also quite shocked at this time. At this time, he was stunned for a moment, and he was speechless for a while. No, what on earth is the red fire scorpion today? Why is it so despicable? I'm afraid it's too much. The corner of Arya's mouth also evoked a bit of sadness, a bit of helplessness flashed in her eyes, and her brows were raised slightly. It is indeed a bit excessive, but the poison is like this, and the poison is extremely strong. If not treated in time, I am afraid that I will really die from the poison. Lin Yu half closed his eyes, and then said softly, damn it, damn it. Is there any antidote? Lin Yu's eyes were staring straight at Arya, but in the Mall system, with Lin Yu's current authority, basically most of the antidote pills could be redeemed. But at this time, Arya just shook her head like this. Arya glanced at Lin Yu, with a hint of sadness at the corner of her mouth. Based on the current situation, anyone nowadays no antidote can cure this poison. Lin Yu half closed his eyes, and then sighed quietly. At this time, Su Weiner looked very painful, and she moaned one after another. Lin Yu walked slowly towards Su Weiner, and then gritted his teeth. This. At this time, Su Weiner didn't wait for Lin Yu to make a move, but after seeing Lin Yu, she pounced directly on her. After a day and a night, Lin Yu glanced at the beautiful woman next to him, and he had some complicated thoughts in his heart. For a moment, Lin Yu really didn't know how to face Su Weiner. Although Su Weiner had already woken up at this time, after the incident happened, Su Weiner still had some consciousness after detoxification. Su Weiner also understood what happened, so she was so strong, pretending to be calm, and refused to wake up. After a while, Lin Yu just gritted his teeth, then turned his head, glanced at Su Weiner, and coughed lightly.